On a hot summer afternoon in the year 2455, a young boy named Jake Thompson was sitting in the corner of his bedroom, looking out the window at the stars. The Earth had changed a lot since the old days, but one thing had stayed the same. The stars were still just as big and bright as ever. Jake loved stargazing, especially because of the stories his grandpa used to tell him. Grandpa Frank was one of the smartest people Jake knew. He'd worked as a scientist for the government, studying space and the mysterious things out there. But one night, Grandpa told Jake a story that made his eyes go wide with wonder. "There's a secret in the stars, Jake," Grandpa Frank had said in a serious voice, sitting in his old leather chair by the fireplace. "A big secret, and it's why no one at all, can ever go past a certain point in space." Jake had been curious ever since, and he spent hours studying old maps of the galaxy. He'd learned that humanity had explored a lot of space, but the farther you went from Earth, the stranger the map became. There was one part of the galaxy where all the lines and dots just stopped. It was like the map ended there, and every explorer who'd ever gone that way had disappeared. No one knew why. But Jake wanted to know. One day, while he was reading through some dusty old books in his grandpa's study, he found something strange, an old yellowing letter. It wasn't written by Grandpa, but by someone named Dr. Eliza Monroe, a scientist who had worked with Grandpa many years ago. The letter was dated 2427, and the words were clear but written with a kind of urgency. "Jake, if you're reading this, then it's time. You must know the truth. The end of the map is no mistake. There is something there, something that's been hidden for a reason. Do not trust anyone who says it's just empty space. There's a reason the galactic map ends there, and it's not what they want you to know." Jake's heart raced. What did Dr. Monroe mean? And why had his grandpa never mentioned this? His curiosity got the best of him, and he decided that he had to find out. He wasn't just some kid. He was Jake Thompson, and he wasn't afraid to uncover the truth. The next day, Jake sneaked into the old garage where his grandpa had kept all sorts of gadgets and tools. Among them was something Jake had never seen before. An old spaceship, small but sleek, with a faded American flag painted on the side. It was a relic from the past, built back when the first colonies were established on Mars and the Moon. The ship was called the Liberty, and it was designed for deep space exploration. Jake knew this was it, the ship that could take him to the place where the galactic map ended. He wasn't going to wait for an invitation or permission. He was going to go, and he was going to discover the truth for himself. With a deep breath, Jake climbed into the cockpit. It felt like he was sitting inside a piece of history, like all those astronauts who had first explored space. He punched in the coordinates for the mysterious spot on the map, and with a hum, the engines powered up. The journey into deep space was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the ship's engines. Jake couldn't believe he was actually doing it. He was leaving Earth's orbit and heading into the unknown. The stars outside the window grew bigger, the galaxy stretched wide, and soon he could no longer see the familiar blue of Earth. As the ship sped deeper into space, Jake couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He kept thinking about what Grandpa Frank had said. The secret is out there, but no one is allowed to know. Hours passed. Then, just as he was about to drift off to sleep in his seat, the ship's alarms went off. A strange, high-pitched sound filled the cockpit, and the screen in front of him began to flicker. Jake jumped up, staring at the map on the screen. The coordinates had shifted. He wasn't just at the edge of the galaxy anymore. He was beyond it. "Uh-oh," Jake muttered, his hands shaking as he tried to adjust the controls. "This isn't good." The stars outside the window began to change shape. They no longer looked like tiny pinpricks of light. Instead, they began to move, swirling around in a pattern that made Jake's stomach flip. It was as if the stars themselves were alive and watching him. Jake felt his heart race. He wasn't sure what was happening, but something was definitely wrong. And then he saw it. At the very edge of the galaxy, a massive shadow appeared. It was darker than the blackness of space itself, and it seemed to grow bigger the closer Jake got. The ship's systems started to glitch, and the map on the screen began to turn red. Jake tried to turn the ship around, but it was like something was pulling him closer to the dark shadow. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the comms. "Jake, do you hear me? This is Dr. Monroe. Whatever you do, do not approach the edge. You're too close. You have to turn around now. It's not what you think. There's a reason they're keeping it secret." Jake's hands gripped the controls as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The shadow was getting bigger and bigger, swallowing the stars around it. He wasn't just about to discover the truth. He was about to face something far bigger than he could imagine. And it was coming for him. Jake's heart pounded as the dark shape loomed closer, filling the entire view in front of him. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him, the kind of silence that wasn't just empty, but watching. The voice on the comms crackled again. "Jake, you need to listen. You're heading straight for the core, the place beyond the map. It's not just empty space. It's alive. Whatever it is, it's been there since before humanity even left Earth. Don't make the mistake we all made." Jake's fingers were frozen on the controls, but the ship seemed to have a mind of its own. It was being pulled forward, as though it was being guided by some invisible force, dragging him closer to the edge of everything. The ship's sensors beeped wildly, trying to detect something, anything, but there was nothing. The screen was a blank, swirling red. He couldn't turn around. "No, don't let it take you," Dr. Monroe's voice pleaded, frantic now. "There are things that can never be allowed to escape. You have to understand." But before she could finish, the voice cut out, replaced by a deafening roar. The ship shook violently, and Jake barely held onto his seat as alarms blared in his ears. Something massive, something ancient was reaching out for him. The dark mass in front of him wasn't just an object, it was an entire presence. It felt aware. Jake swallowed hard, trying to keep his breathing steady. He wasn't just in deep space anymore. He was in another realm, a place beyond what any human had ever explored. He took a deep breath, knowing he had to do something, anything. But the ship was moving too fast. The core was now less than a few miles away. Suddenly, the dark shape pulsed with a brilliant light, and the stars around it began to distort. The light seemed to grow brighter with each passing second, twisting into a massive spiral. It was pulling everything into itself, like a great cosmic whirlpool. Jake's mind raced. What was it? Why was this place off limits? Grandpa Frank and Dr. Monroe had both been clear. No one should ever go here. Then, just as Jake felt a tightness in his chest, a flood of memories came rushing back. Grandpa's words, Dr. Monroe's warning, all the things they had said, all the clues he had ignored before setting off on this journey. The core wasn't just a place. It was a barrier built to protect humanity. As the ship neared the dark mass, the console suddenly lit up with a strange set of coordinates. They weren't the ones Jake had entered, but they were closer. They were inside the swirling darkness, and they were calling to him like a voice in the void. "Jake, listen to me!" Dr. Monroe's voice returned, shaky but full of urgency. "I'm going to explain everything. The core is a prison, a place where something dangerous is kept. It's ancient. It's beyond anything you can imagine. The map doesn't just stop there because it's the edge of space. It stops because that's where the seals are. The seals that keep this entity from escaping. And you've unlocked it. You've come too close." Jake's eyes widened. A prison? For what? Before he could process, the lights in the cockpit flickered again. A sharp, cold wind seemed to blow through the ship, even though he knew there was no atmosphere out here. The temperature dropped, and the walls of the ship groaned as though they were under immense pressure. Then he saw it. A massive form began to take shape in the swirling darkness. It was huge, like a mountain, but shifting, moving. It was like looking at a living shadow, a being made of pure nothingness. And yet, Jake could feel it. He could feel it watching him. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. And then he heard the voice. It wasn't spoken out loud, but Jake felt it in his mind, as if the being was speaking directly into his soul. "You have come. At last." Jake froze, panic gripping him. He tried to fight it, tried to steer the ship away from the entity, but it was too late. The ship was now locked in place, hovering at the very edge of the dark mass. "You seek knowledge," the voice continued, "but you cannot understand. You are not ready. Your kind never was." Jake's fingers trembled over the controls. His breath came in shallow gasps. He wasn't just facing a cosmic mystery now, he was facing something ancient, something powerful, something alive. And it wasn't happy that he was here. "Jake," Dr. Monroe's voice came through again, frantic, panicked. "You have to go back. Now! You've woken it up. Don't you see? This is why we have stayed away. If it gets free—" The voice interrupted Dr. Monroe's warning with a terrible, low hum that vibrated through the ship. Jake gripped the controls harder, but the ship seemed to be responding less and less to his commands. "You are a child," the being spoke again. "You are not the first to reach the core. You will not be the last. But your fate is the same as theirs." Jake's heart pounded harder. He wasn't sure what was happening, but one thing was clear. Whatever this thing was, it had been waiting for him. It had been waiting for someone from Earth to come and open the door, and now that it had found him, it wouldn't let him go. Jake glanced at the screen in desperation. There had to be something he could do. He wasn't going to let this be the end. He wasn't going to let the dark mass win. He quickly scanned the controls. His eyes landed on one small red button, labeled Emergency Override. He didn't know what it would do, but it was his only chance. He pressed it. The moment Jake pressed the emergency override button, the ship shook violently, sending him crashing back into his seat. A bright flash of light erupted in the cockpit, blinding him for a split second. The dark presence outside, the entity that had been looming over him, suddenly flickered and wavered like a hologram. "Yes!" Jake gasped, his heart racing. He had no idea what the override was supposed to do, but it seemed to be having some effect on the ship. The strange pull from the core loosened, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Jake felt like he might have a chance to break free. But then the voice returned. "Foolish child, you cannot escape." The words resonated in Jake's mind, each one sharper than the last. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The entity seemed stronger now, its presence more intense, as if it were getting angrier. As Jake fumbled with the controls, a strange beep came from the console. A message appeared on the screen. "Incoming transmission, unknown source." Before Jake could react, the transmission buzzed to life. "Jake, can you hear me?" The voice was young, almost childlike, but with an edge of confidence that caught Jake off guard. "Who is this?" Jake demanded, his voice shaking. "How are you contacting me?" The voice paused, then responded with a small laugh. "Relax, kid. I'm not your enemy, at least not yet." Jake's eyes widened as he studied the screen. A face appeared, young, maybe 17 or 18, with short brown hair and a mischievous grin. It was a girl, but she was definitely not from Earth. She had a strange, glowing tattoo-like marking on her neck, and behind her was the faint outline of a spaceship, much larger than his. What are you?" Jake whispered, disbelief mixing with fear. "Name's Mara," the girl said, winking at him. "I've been tracking you since you crossed the boundary, and let me tell you, you've just woken up the worst thing in the galaxy." "The core?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "Yep," she said, her grin fading into something more serious. "And if you're still alive, that means you're either incredibly lucky or you're about to be its next snack." Mara's words sent a jolt of panic through Jake, but before he could say anything else, another voice interrupted. This one was older, gravelly, and full of authority. "Mara, enough?" The new voice belonged to a man who appeared on the screen beside her. He was older, with a weathered face, deep-set eyes, and a thick gray beard. "Jake, listen to me. I'm Captain Seth Carter, and you've made a big mistake." "Captain Carter?" Jake asked, recognizing the name. "You're the one who led the first expedition to the edge of the map, right?" The captain nodded grimly. "We've all been there, kid. That was years ago, but we know what's out there. And you've stirred up something none of us should have ever messed with. You don't know what the core can do. It's not just a thing. It's a prison built by an ancient civilization, one that knew far too much about the universe's darkest secrets." Jake's mind spun. Ancient civilization? Dark secrets? He had only just begun to understand how deep this mystery went, but now he was face to face with people who seemed to know more than they were letting on. "I didn't mean to wake it up," Jake exclaimed, hands gripping the ship's controls. "I just wanted to figure out why the map stopped, why people disappeared out there. I had no idea." "We all wanted to know," Mara cut in, her voice quiet now. "But some questions are better left unanswered." Captain Carter leaned in closer, his eyes locked on Jake. "Mara's right. You've opened a door that shouldn't have been touched. And the core's keeper, the thing that's trapped inside, it's not just some monster. It's an entity older than time itself. When it's freed, it will consume everything in its path. And right now, you're sitting on the doorstep." Jake's head was spinning. "So what do I do? How do I stop it?" Mara crossed her arms, looking thoughtful. "You can't stop it, at least not from here. But there's a way to slow it down. You'll need help." "Help?" Jake echoed. "From who?" The captain's expression darkened. "From someone who knows how to deal with the core, someone who's been keeping it locked away for centuries." Before Jake could ask any more questions, the ship lurched again. The core outside pulsed with a menacing light, and the entire ship shook violently. The display screen flickered once more, this time flashing a warning. "Massive energy spike detected." "Not good," Mara said, her face going pale. "It's waking up faster than we thought. We need to get to the core's nexus before it breaks through completely. That's our only chance." Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. The core was a living prison, and it was going to break loose unless they did something fast. But what could he, just a kid, do to stop something so powerful? Captain Carter spoke again, his tone urgent. "Mara, take the lead. We need to move now. Jake, stay on course. We'll guide you." Jake swallowed hard. He didn't have a choice anymore. He had started this journey with nothing more than curiosity, but now it was about survival. "Okay," he said, his voice steadying. "I'll follow you." Mara nodded and typed quickly on her console. "Good. We'll guide you through the danger zone, but don't let that thing get too close. Trust me, you don't want to see what happens when it gets hungry." Suddenly, the lights in the cockpit dimmed, and the temperature dropped even further. A cold, metallic wind howled through the air vents, making the hairs on the back of Jake's neck stand up. Something was coming. Jake's eyes flicked back to the screen, and he saw that Mara's ship had shifted position, heading toward the heart of the darkness. The core was pulsating with a rhythmic, terrifying energy, as if it were alive and breathing, preparing to strike. "We're not alone out here, kid," Captain Carter's voice warned. "Whatever you do, don't let it get into your mind. It'll try to invade your thoughts. Stay sharp." Jake's grip tightened on the controls. This was far beyond what he had ever imagined. And now he was part of something much bigger than himself. The journey into the heart of the core was only just beginning. And if he failed, there might be no turning back. The ship shuddered again, this time harder than before, and Jake felt the intense pull of the core once more. The stars outside twisted and contorted as if they were being sucked into the blackness, the very fabric of space warping. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "We're getting too close," Jake muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. Mara's face appeared on the screen, her eyes wide with concern. "Jake, you need to stay calm. Just follow my lead." "I'm trying," Jake replied, the pressure building in his chest. "But I can't control the ship. It's like it's being pulled in." The ship shook again, and the temperature dropped even further. Jake could feel his breath turning to fog as a strange sensation washed over him, like something was trying to invade his mind. The voice, that voice from the core, whispered again, "You cannot escape. You belong to me now." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't think straight. The voice was like a shadow creeping into his thoughts, distorting his reality. But just as quickly, the voice was drowned out by Captain Carter's booming voice through the comms. "Focus, Jake!" the captain shouted, his voice filled with authority. "Don't let it control you. It's trying to take over your mind. Fight it!" Jake shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his thoughts. He focused on the console in front of him, taking deep breaths as he struggled to regain control of the ship. He could hear Mara's voice, too, encouraging him through the comms. "Come on, Jake. You've got this. Just remember, it's all in your head. Stay grounded." With a massive effort, Jake managed to wrestle back control, just enough to keep the ship from spiraling directly into the heart of the core. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The ship was now in a strange limbo, hovering at the very edge of the darkness. It was like a border between worlds. But then, just as Jake thought things couldn't get worse, something unexpected happened. A new voice rang out through the comms, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is Dahlia," the voice said, smooth and calm, but with an edge of urgency. "We've detected you, Jake, and I'm not going to let you do this alone." On the screen, a new face appeared. It was a woman, mid-30s, dark hair, sharp features, and she wore a military-style uniform with a patch that read, "Phoenix Squadron." "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice still shaky. "And how do you know my name?" "We know more than you think," Dahlia said, her eyes scanning the screen behind her. "The Phoenix Squadron has been tracking the core for years. We've been trying to understand it, to figure out how to seal it for good." "But it's not just about sealing it," Captain Carter interjected, his tone grim. "We need to neutralize the entity inside. It's not just a cosmic prison. It's a force, and if it breaks free, it will consume everything." Dahlia turned back to her console, her fingers flying across the keys. "We've been gathering intel for a long time. The entity you've woken, its name is Zaire, is the last of its kind. It was imprisoned millennia ago by an ancient race called the Althari. They were the first to understand the true power of the core. But their downfall was that they underestimated Zaire's influence. Now it's trying to break free." Jake stared at the screen, stunned. Zaire? The name felt strange, foreign, and yet somehow familiar. "You mean to say this is a living being inside the core?" Jake asked, his voice faltering. Dahlia nodded. "Yes, and Zaire isn't just a monster. It's an intelligence. It can warp minds, manipulate memories, and bend reality. The Althari built the prison to contain it, but the seals have begun to weaken over time. And now you've opened the door. Jake's mind raced. This was bigger than he ever imagined. The maps, the strange disappearances, the secrets his grandpa had hinted at. It was all leading to this. Zaire was real, and if it got out, it could destroy everything. "But how do we stop it?" Jake asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "That's where the real problem comes in," Dahlia replied, her eyes darkening. "You can't stop it, at least not with conventional weapons or tactics. We've been researching the Althari technology for years, but there's only one way to seal Zaire again." "What's that?" Jake asked, his breath catching. "We need to find the heart of the core. It's a massive crystalline structure at the very center of the entity's prison. If we can get there and activate the Althari relic hidden within it, we can reset the seals. But the closer you get to the core's center, the more dangerous it becomes. Zaire doesn't just control minds, it controls time. The closer we get to the heart, the more warped the space around us will become. Things won't make sense." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Time? Now it wasn't just about stopping an ancient monster. It was about fighting against the very nature of reality. "You're not alone in this, Jake," Dahlia said, her expression softening. "But you need to trust us. We can help you, but the journey to the heart is dangerous. We need to move quickly, or else the core will collapse entirely." Mara's face appeared again, her expression determined. "We're ready, kid. You've already crossed the line. Now it's about how we finish this." Before Jake could respond, another figure appeared on the screen, stepping into view beside Dahlia. This man had a rough look about him, scarred face, military gear, and a cold demeanor that seemed to contrast with the warmth of Dahlia and Mara. "Name's Hendricks," the man said gruffly, "and I don't do this out of kindness, but I owe Captain Carter. If you want to survive this, kid, you'll listen to everything we tell you." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of what he was about to face pressing down on him. "I'll follow your lead," Jake said, his voice steady. "But you have to promise me something. We do this together. No one gets left behind." The faces on the screen exchanged looks, then nodded. "Deal," Dahlia said, her voice resolute. Captain Carter gave Jake a sharp look. "All right, Jake, it's time to move. We don't have much time left before Zaire breaks free. We'll guide you through the next phase. Stay sharp." The stars outside began to warp even more violently, and Jake could feel the ship being pulled in deeper toward the core. The darkness seemed to reach out, tendrils of shadow extending like fingers, grabbing at the very fabric of space. It was now or never. The darkness outside the ship seemed to grow even thicker, and Jake could feel the ship being pulled deeper, closer to the core. His hands were shaking on the controls, but he fought to keep his focus. The pull was almost hypnotic, like gravity, and he had to force himself to ignore the whispering voice in his mind. "Come closer, Jake. I can give you everything you desire: knowledge, power, immortality." "Don't listen to it!" Mara's voice cut through the haze, sharp and clear. "It's Zaire. It's trying to manipulate you, to make you its puppet. Focus." Jake snapped out of the trance, forcing his hands back onto the controls. He couldn't let it win. He had to stay in control. Dahlia's face appeared on the screen again, her brow furrowed. "We're going to need to break through the atmosphere distortion soon. If we don't, the core will drag us in, and there'll be no turning back." "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "How do we fight it?" Dahlia's lips pressed together in a thin line. "We need to get to the heart of the core, but first, we need to clear the Grav Embrace Zone. It's a region around the core that distorts space and time. We won't be able to navigate properly unless we break through. Your ship's not built for this kind of travel, but I have a plan. You need to trust me." Jake swallowed hard. Trust was in short supply right now. "Okay, tell me what to do." Activate the secondary boosters on your ship, Dahlia instructed, her voice calm but filled with urgency. They're not much, but they'll give us enough speed to break free of the gravitational distortions. You'll need to be quick. This is a one-shot deal. If it fails, we'll all be sucked in. Jake's eyes darted to the controls. He hadn't even realized there were secondary boosters on the ship. He quickly toggled the switches, and the ship hummed to life, its engines roaring louder as the boosters activated. Mara, now with a more serious expression, spoke up. I'm going to guide you through the grav embrace. Stay on my tail, okay? You don't want to lose me in there? Got it. Jake clenched his jaw. If this was going to work, he had to focus. He wasn't sure if he believed it was going to work, but he didn't have much of a choice. He pushed the throttle forward. The ship jerked, the boosters kicking in with a violent surge of speed. The stars outside began to warp again, their lights stretching and bending as the core's gravitational field sucked them in. Suddenly, a strange figure appeared in front of Jake on the screen. A new voice, cold and mechanical, crackled through the comms. Target acquired. Redirecting course to core. Jake froze, his eyes narrowing. What the hell? Who is that? The figure on the screen was a humanoid, but it wasn't human. It had pale, ashen skin, with glowing blue lines tracing along its body, like circuits. Its eyes were dark, empty, reflecting only the endless void of space. It was tall, taller than any human, and its presence sent a chill through Jake's entire body. I am the Watcher, the figure spoke, its voice like ice scraping over metal. And you are trespassing on sacred ground. Before Jake could respond, the Watcher reached out with a hand, and the image on the screen flickered. Suddenly, the ship lurched sideways, thrown off course. The pull from the core intensified. What's happening? Jake shouted, struggling to regain control. The screen flashed with warnings, and the ship was now tumbling through space, out of control. It's using the core's power to hijack your ship, Captain Carter barked. It's trying to stop us from getting to the heart. Watcher, Dahlia said, her voice now hard and dangerous. You don't want to do this. We're all going to die if you don't let us through. The Watcher tilted its head, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. You have no idea what you're doing. The core must remain sealed. Zaire cannot be freed. Jake's heart raced. Who are you? What is this place? The Watcher didn't answer. Instead, it extended its hand again, and a pulse of energy shot out from the core, connecting directly to the ship. Jake felt a sudden pressure in his head, as if his very thoughts were being rearranged. We were the ones who sealed Zaire away, the Watcher said. We are the keepers of the core. No one, not even you, is allowed to undo what was done. Jake gritted his teeth, feeling the pressure build in his mind. It was as if his thoughts were being crushed under an invisible weight. He could feel the Watcher's will pushing against him, trying to bend his mind. Fight it! Mara shouted. Jake, remember what you're fighting for. Don't let it break you. Jake's vision blurred, but he could still hear the voices of the crew. Captain Carter's gruff tone broke through the noise. Jake, focus. You can't let them control you. Through the chaos, Jake felt a sudden wave of clarity. It was a strange, almost supernatural moment where everything clicked into place. The core, the Watchers, Zaire, it was all connected. The core wasn't just a prison, it was a war, a battle between forces older than time itself. The Watcher's grip on his mind tightened, but Jake pushed back with all his strength. He wasn't going to let it win. He couldn't let it win. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. He slammed his fist down on the control panel, hitting the override button again. The ship shook violently, and the pressure in his mind suddenly released. The Watcher's image flickered, its form distorting as if it were glitching. No, you cannot. But it was too late. Jake had broken free. Mara's voice came through the comms, full of relief. "Nice job, kid. Now, let's get out of here before it gets any worse." Jake quickly corrected the ship's course, heading straight for the heart of the core. The intense pull began to lessen, but the ship was still being dragged toward the blackness. Then another unexpected voice filled the comms, this one smooth and almost musical, though it held a certain menace. "I don't think so." Jake's eyes widened as the figure appeared on screen. It was a woman, but unlike anything he had seen before. Her features were perfect, too perfect, almost alien. Her skin shimmered with a strange opalescent sheen, and her eyes were a deep, glowing purple. "I am Zara, and you've made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice hypnotic. Mara hissed, her voice tight. "Zara. You can't be here." The woman smiled, and for a moment Jake felt a sudden wave of calm, as if her presence could erase all his fears. But then he remembered who she was. Another keeper. "I think," Zara purred, "it's time for your journey to come to an end." Zara's voice was like a gentle breeze, smooth and almost comforting, but Jake could feel the underlying threat in every word. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment he thought he could hear his heart pounding in rhythm with hers. Mara's voice broke through the tension. "Don't trust her, Jake. She's not one of us." Zara smiled, a glint of amusement in her purple eyes. "Oh, Mara, always so quick to judge. But I am the one who truly understands the core. You're all just pawns in a game far older than any of you can imagine." Jake's grip tightened on the controls, and he felt the ship shaking as if in response to Zara's presence. The pull of the core was growing stronger again, and the stars outside seemed to flicker, bending, as if reality itself was warping. "You're right," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "This is bigger than any of us. But that doesn't mean I'm just going to give up and let you control everything. We're not your pawns." Zara tilted her head, her smile widening, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't even know the full truth, Jake. The core is not a prison. It's a weapon. Zaire is not just a prisoner. It is a power." Jake's mind reeled. He had already learned so much, but there was still so much he didn't understand. A weapon? Was the core meant to be used as a weapon all along? "I don't care what it was meant to be," Jake said, his voice hardening. "We've come this far to stop Zaire. We won't let it destroy everything." "You think you can stop Zaire?" Zara laughed softly. "You don't even realize what you're dealing with. The entity inside the core is not just a force of destruction. It is the key to the universe. If you release it, you'll understand. You'll finally know the truth of everything." The air seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, and the temperature inside the ship dropped even lower, sending chills through Jake's bones. He could feel the weight of the core's influence pressing in on him, the pressure building. Zara stepped closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. "I'm here to make sure the core does what it was always meant to. We were chosen for this mission, Jake. You've only just stumbled into it." "No," Jake said firmly, standing up from his seat. He could feel the sweat on his palms, but his determination was rising. "I might not understand everything, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not going to let you use this weapon. I'm going to stop Zaire, and I'm going to make sure the core stays sealed." Zara's expression darkened, the smile falling away entirely. "You're a fool. You have no idea what you're about to unleash on yourself." The stars outside the ship flickered one last time, and suddenly the gravitational pull from the core snapped into place with full force. The ship jerked violently, throwing Jake back into his seat. The console sparked and crackled with static, and he had to fight to keep his hands on the controls. "Jake," Mara's voice was frantic through the comms. "It's pulling us in too fast. If we don't get out of here, now, we'll be lost." Captain Carter's voice followed immediately, steady, but filled with urgency. "Override the autopilot, kid. You're the only one who can control this ship now." With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Jake's hands flew over the console. The ship was spiraling toward the black abyss, and he could feel Zare's presence closing in, like a dark cloud wrapping around him. "I can't let this happen. Not now." Jake hit the emergency override button again, pulling the ship away from the heart of the core with all the strength the engines could muster. The ship groaned and screeched as the energy inside the core fought back, but Jake held on, steering them with everything he had. The pull lessened, but Zara's voice still lingered in the comms, now colder and filled with anger. "You can't escape the truth, Jake. The core will not be denied." Jake gritted his teeth. He wasn't sure how long he could keep fighting, but he couldn't give up. He refused to let the universe fall under the control of Zare or anyone like Zara. With one final desperate push, Jake activated the ship's emergency thrusters, sending them blasting out of the core's gravitational grip. For a moment, everything was still. The dark energy from the core tugged at them, but they had broken free, at least for now. The stars outside the window returned to their normal patterns, the swirling darkness of the core fading away as they shot out into space, far from the danger. The crew was silent for a few long moments, the weight of what had almost happened settling over them. "We did it," Mara said, her voice a quiet relief. "For now." Jake leaned back in his seat, breathing heavily. "But what about Zare? Is it really over?" Captain Carter's voice crackled through the comms, a heavy sigh following his words. "No, kid, it's not over. We've only just bought ourselves some time. Zare is still out there, and Zara is right. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of what the core truly is." Dahlia's voice came next, more serious than ever. "But now we know. We know that we can't just seal it away and hope it stays hidden. We'll have to destroy it. Zare, the core, it all has to be destroyed, or it will keep coming back over and over until the entire galaxy falls under its control." Jake swallowed hard. He had never imagined it would come to this. The truth was far bigger and darker than he had ever realized. But now, with everything on the line, there was no turning back. "We'll destroy it," Jake said, his voice firm, though he could feel the weight of his responsibility. "We have to." There was a long pause before Mara's voice came back, quieter this time. "We'll do it together, Jake. We've got your back." Captain Carter's voice was steady and commanding. "We'll need allies. We'll need more information. But together, we stand a chance." Jake took one last look at the fading image of the core on the screen. There was no easy way out of this, but he wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. They were going to finish what they started.